Okay, let's get started. So welcome to the webinar today. My name's Aaron Clark. I'm the founder and managing director at an organisation called Hudson&Hayes. The topic for today is intelligent automation in procurement. So it's going to be a mix of presentation and also discussion. I'm joined by my colleague Bilal Sheikh, who's going to provide a Chief Procurement Officer perspective on the various discussion points that we're going to go through today. And we've got about an hour, so there's a lot of content that we're going to cover in that time. So keen to kind of get started and jump in. Very keen that you guys walk away with practical knowledge and tips of how you can apply this within your organization as well. So I think that's going to be really important as we progress through the presentation. Let's have a quick look through the agenda for today's session. So we'll start with an overview of Hudson&Hayes. I'm not going to spend too much time on this part of the presentation, but we'll just talk very briefly about who we are and what we do. We'll then start with some basics. So in terms of intelligent automation, what do we actually mean by that? So what's our definition, and what are the various different technologies and capabilities that sit underneath the intelligent automation umbrella? We'll then draw our attention to procurement and how we can unlock value across source to pay, which is the end-to-end value stream within procurement, using various different tools and techniques. And I'll touch on a few specific use cases that you can apply in your organization. We'll then discuss key drivers and benefits for procurement. Bilal will provide a perspective here, looking from different perspectives. So we'll discuss what's the benefit of intelligent automation from a business perspective, from a procurement professional perspective, and we'll also discuss the customer and the budget holder perspective as well. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what's required to implement intelligent automation, from the initial identification of opportunities all the way through to deployment and ensuring that the change is in bed within the business. So we'll start with some introductions. I'll start with myself. So my name is Aaron Clark, as I said, founder and managing director at Hudson&Hayes. My background is change and transformation. So I've worked in change and transformation for the past 15 years. I've worked across multiple industries. I've worked with most of the large telcos, spent some time at BT, O2, Telefonica, Free, and also TalkTalk. Was around at when Jaguar Land Rover kick-started their automation journey back in 2017, and started Hudson&Hayes with the mission to make work more valuable and meaningful. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a second. Over to you, Bilal.
Thank you, Aaron. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and I would like to welcome everybody. I can see from the participant list some friends and ex-colleagues from across the pond, so thank you very much for waking up early, and some people from India, so thank you for staying in the afternoon. My name is Bilal Sheikh. I have no consulting background. I'm a subject matter expert in procurement. I have had the opportunity to work in various industries. I've worked in consumer goods, medical diagnostics, infrastructure, utilities, oil and gas, and food service. I've had the opportunity to lead procurement functions at group level in a couple of large organizations. And now I'm currently, I've got a portfolio of roles. One of them is working as a strategic advisor to Hudson&Hayes, and I'm looking forward to participating in this webinar.
Thanks, Bilal. Okay, let's jump in. A very quick introduction to our business. This isn't, what the webinar is all about, but just so you've got some context here. So Hudson&Hayes, we're a transformation and operational excellence consultancy. Our mission is to make work more valuable and meaningful for customers and employees. So we often talk about the work being valuable from a customer perspective, but rarely do we talk about how we can make the work more valuable for employees and people within the business. And with the technology that we've got available to us today, there's never been a greater opportunity to make that happen. So the way in which we do that is by combining process improvement using some of the more traditional tools and techniques that most of us will be familiar with automation and predictive analytics. And we're going to really get under the skin of how we can apply those three things to optimize an end-to-end process in this session. In terms of the problems that we solve for clients, very much specific to the problem that needs to be solved, right? So we've got a number of services that we offer: operating model design, end-to-end process improvements, intelligent automation, data analytics. We also help to build in operational excellence capability from the ground up, and contingent resource. So in some cases, it's just more boots on the ground. We've got a wide network and community of consulting partners. So that's another kind of service that we offer as well. So let's jump into intelligent automation. And see, for me, and I'm sure you guys would agree, if you go onto LinkedIn, it's a term that you will hear and see quite a lot, right? And I think there's quite a few misconceptions in terms of what we mean by intelligent automation. In my experience, people tend to think it's just RPA, robotic process automation, which is just one technology, one tool that we can use to optimize a process. The reality is there are many technologies and capabilities that sit underneath the intelligent automation umbrella. So if we start with a definition, I try to keep this stuff as simple as I can. So intelligent automation is a new generation of software-based automation. As I've said, it's about combining different methods and different technologies to execute a business process automatically on behalf of knowledge workers. Typically, it's the manual, repetitive work that lends itself to intelligent automation. And when we talk about mimicking the capabilities of a knowledge worker, it's typically within these four areas, right? So think and learn. This is about creating insights and predicting the future using data. So big data management, machine learning and predictive analytics, data visualization. Then we've got vision. So this is about analyzing images and language and objects. A good example of this is where we will have unstructured documentation like PDFs, and we can extract key information from those documents, and then ensure we're able to kind of use other technologies to use that data, such as RPA and stuff like that. So within this space, we've got optical character recognition. It's been around for a number of years. I remember implementing this at an organization earlier on in my career. Intelligent character recognition, it's another example here. So lots and lots of different capabilities within each of these areas. Language, natural language processing, chatbots, you guys may be familiar with, huge amount of growth within customer services for chatbots. Execution, we've got robotic process automation, smart workflow, and low code platforms. Now, the real power of intelligent automation comes when we're able to combine these different technologies to optimize an end-to-end process. So it's about looking at a process and thinking about which technology is suited to the type of process or the type of tasks that you're executing. So within the procurement space, typical source to pay value stream, we can leverage pretty much all of those capabilities to automate an end-to-end process. Let's run through a few of those use cases. So upstream, in the source to pay value stream, we've got conduct strategic sourcing. Now, a use case that a number of organizations have adopted is predicting demand, and we do this through predictive analytics. So this allows us, by leveraging internal data and external market data, to predict with a good level of accuracy the demand that we'd expect to get within procurement. Also, we can leverage natural language processing to extract key information from market research reports, right? So procurement folks spend a huge amount of time on the more strategic sourcing side, just going through documentation, conducting research. NLP allows us to extract that information out automatically, so speeds that process up quite significantly. Spend analytics. So this is another huge growth area. There's lots of very impressive spend analytics tools out there on the market. We're partnered with a few organizations in that space. But what procurement professionals are looking for now is, whereas in the past it would be about hindsight, right? So a bit like looking in your rear wheel mirror, spending information was looking back on the past. It was historical. It has value, right? But we're now able to combine your historical spend data with market intelligence data and various other variables to look forward and make predictions around spend and pricing and all that good stuff. So that gives procurement professionals the foresight that they may not have had in the past. The other use case here is predicting spend data classification. So, some of you guys will be aware, classifying spend data down to a decent level can be a very time-consuming activity. Many years ago, it was something that procurement would do once a year. They'd go through the data, and it'd be a huge manual effort to classify spend data. We're now able to do that automatically, and this capability is built into a number of spend analytics tools, and we do this through machine learning. Also combine sort of NLP and machine learning. So, again, a good example of combining those various different capabilities. As we move downstream in the process, we've got so select, vendor, and negotiate. So automating new service requests. This is actually an organization that we're working with at the moment. So a large manufacturing business, their global IT procurement intake process at the moment is very manual. There's people sending requests over Teams, over email. We're going to leverage a low-code workflow tool to automate the intake process, apply some intelligence in terms of various questions that we'll answer when people raise their requests. And again, huge amount of efficiencies that we can get from that process. Another example, actually with the same organization, so predicting pricing using internal and external data, automating pricing updates, visualizing supplier performance. So some of you guys may be familiar with various data visualization tools in the market. Power BI, is the sort of market leader in that space at the moment. As we move further downstream, we've got RPA, so automating the input of new supplier data into multiple systems. When I worked for a large automotive, when they would onboard a new supplier, there were multiple systems where the supplier data had to be input into. So in the past, very manual, copy and paste from one system to another, able to use RPA to automate that process. Moving further downstream, so we've got, I'll tell you a bit of story on this one actually. So when I worked for a large automotive company, I remember having a conversation with one of their buyers, sort of, asking various questions as part of a day in the life of. And one of my questions was, what is it that you like about working in procurement, right? And he said the two things that I'm most passionate about is supplier relationship management and the negotiation side, right? So when I, sort of probed a little further in terms of how much time was spent on those activities, it was pretty minimal. And the reason for that is the large proportion of the time was spent dealing with queries from the business that they probably could have answered themselves. So a number of queries where the information's available, but as the first point of call, they go to their buyer. So I'm not saying you can eliminate this altogether. It's very important that we build relationships with people out in the business, but a chatbot is an opportunity to automate some responses to some of those common questions. And there's various different tools that we can use to do that. And as we move further down, I mean, this is probably less procurement, more accounts payable, but important nonetheless, because we need to be thinking about this stuff end to end. We can use intelligent document processing to extract data from unstructured PDF invoices. Most invoices, when they're sent by the supplier, they're in a PDF format, and we can extract the information out, and then RPA can pick it up and do its job by automating the actual processing of that invoice. And we can also automate supplier payments. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of use cases, right? But it's important to recognize that by combining these different technologies, the opportunity across source to pay is huge. And we'll get onto this in a second, but some of the analysis that we've conducted shows that over 50% of the source of pay process is automatable in some way, shape, or form. So what I want to do now is quickly play you guys a video. It's a couple of minutes long that demonstrates the power of combining these capabilities. It's a video from Automation Anywhere, who you may be familiar with, and shows how we combine RPA with IQ Bots, which is a product that has various different other cognitive capabilities beyond RPA to automate the end-to-end purchase order process. So just give me 2 seconds and I'll play you guys the video. So I just let me go back so I can put my my video back on. So I wanted to play you guys that video just to demonstrate the power of combining various different capabilities. So we've got RPA, right? So I think most people now are relatively familiar with RPA and the capability that we can get there, but RPA alone is quite limited, right? So a number of the use cases that you identify for automation will require the processing of unstructured data. And this is where these various other capabilities are, become relevant, and then you can combine them and it becomes very powerful across an end-to-end process. So now that we understand, our definition of intelligent automation and the different technologies that sit underneath the intelligent automation umbrella, let's think about how this now relates to procurement. I think it's no surprise, right, that the 2020 crisis is shaping the 2021 agenda in most businesses across most functions, but more within procurement. There's been a huge shift since COVID. So there was a survey conducted by the Hackett Group that lists out 10 priorities for chief procurement officers. We'll run through them, and then I want to touch on which of these priorities are relevant and impacted by automation. So we've got reduce spend cost, reduce supply chain risk, act as a strategic advisor for the business, accelerate procurement digital transformation, improve procurement agility, modernize procurement application platforms, align skills and talent with changing business needs, improve analytical and reporting capabilities, enable corporate sustainability goals, and increase spend influence. Now, if we look at those 10 priorities, there are 3 that are quite clearly directly impacted by automation and digital. Accelerate procurement digital transformation, the modernization of procurement application platforms, and improving analytical and reporting capabilities. But the reality is, if we look at the others, they are enabled by automation and technology. So I won't go through all of them, but reduce spend cost is absolutely driven and enabled by technology. The spend analytics platforms that provide visibility into spend and actually the ability to make predictions into the future so that we can have meaningful conversations with our suppliers ahead of time will be a key enabler for reducing spend cost. Acting as a strategic advisor to the business, right? So for a number of years, this has been a goal of procurement, procurement to have a seat at the table. However, the ability to do that is driven by the amount of repetitive, manual, transactional based work that sits in procurement and has sat in procurement for a number of years. Technology enables us to shift time away from that activity to really focus on the more strategic part. So back to the story I told about, the guy at the large automotive, those activities that are taking up a huge amount of time, we can start to reduce and eliminate those through technology. Despite all of this, right? So despite the opportunity, and clearly it's a priority for procurement leaders, broad-based adoption is still quite low, right? So if we take, I'll just touch on robotic process automation. Broad-based adoption is due to grow quite significantly over the next 1 to 2 years, but is currently quite low. So broad-based adoption 6%, limited adoption is 24%. So we're expecting a 2.3 increase in the number of organizations that are using robotic process automation within procurement. So, there's clearly a lot of opportunity. The opportunity today, in terms of the number of tasks that are automatable in some way, we predict around 50%. So we conducted an analysis across source to pay, listed out the tasks, the various different capabilities that one can leverage. And we found that it's around about 50% of those tasks where we can leverage existing technology to drive automation. The key shifts that we can expect in the future is from tactical to strategic, as we've already discussed, from hindsight to foresight in terms of the use of data, from inflexible and siloed to more of an agile-based organization structure, and the perception of procurement moving from one of gatekeeper to valued business partner. So what I want to do now is just build on that conversation slightly with Bilal. So Bilal will provide a kind of chief procurement officer perspective on the value of automation from the procurement professional perspective, user and budget holder, and also the business as a whole.
Thank you, Aaron. So I think some of the themes you've already covered, but I'll take them in each of the 3 dimensions. When you ask procurement professionals, where are you today from where you'd like to be tomorrow, they'll tell you we're spending more time than we would like on mundane things, on administrative things that are distracting us, and we're spending too little time on the creative things and on the engagement with the stakeholders and with the market in order for us to bring value. They would also tell you data has always been a problem, and initially it was, I haven't got access to data, I cannot see the data clearly. Now, even those companies where they have got access to data, they're starting to say, data is telling me what's happened in the past. How can technology help me understand from data what's going to happen in the future? And this is what Aaron was alluding to in terms of predictive analytics. And this is starting to find ground in the procurement area. And Hudson&Hayes are working on a project in this area with one of the clients. When we go to budget holders, and I would say it's exactly the same with procurement professionals. In our private lives, and particularly this has been accelerated with COVID, we all buy things for our private lives, products and services on the web. And if you take the example of Amazon or Amazon Prime, people will tell you, I can find whatever I want on Amazon, which is interesting because it's really, you can only find what Amazon chooses to put on their platform. Not everything, but they've got enough for people to feel that they can buy whatever they want. You don't need to interact with anybody to place an order. You can actually click a button and order what you like. It's easy to use. They see the products, they compare the products, they understand what they need to do. And in some respects, they tell you, well, I'm doing the shopping and I'm doing the selection myself. Why do I need procurement? Amazon allows me to do procurement myself. And to sort of, in some respects, to add insult to injury to professional procurement people, they tell you, not only I can place the order the same day, I actually get the delivery the same day. And then they go back to their place of work and they want to procure something, and they're told, well, actually, you'll be non-compliant if you don't use procurement. And they go to procurement, and procurement say, give me 6 months to run the tender for you, and then I'll tell you what you can get. So there's a big a very, very big split between where the expectation is, and the expectation is getting higher by the day, and where reality is for budget holders, which creates a lot of frustration. And ultimately, Amazon is a process done right, enabled by technology. That's everything. And I think this is where we in procurement functions in the business will need to think about how do we get our processes right, and how do we enable them with technology. And going to the business dimension, what businesses expect from procurement is really simply two main buckets. One is, I'd like procurement to add value, and the second one is, I'd like procurement to reduce risk. And this is where value add enabled by technology, whether it is managing a tail span, whether it is managing value leakage through non-compliance, whether it is by reducing overhead costs of the function through automation. All of this is enabled by technology. And risk is, I mean, we've seen when it came to the resilience of the supply chains through COVID, many companies struggled with their first-tier suppliers, and most companies struggled with their second-tier and third-tier suppliers. And without the visibility that human beings as teams will never figure it out by themselves, the data is so vast. Without the technology, it will never happen. So that's it for me, Aaron.
Thanks, Bilal. That was fantastic. Cool. So, just to recap then. So we've covered the value of intelligent automation for procurement. We've covered the value of intelligent automation from these various different perspectives. Now, what I want to do is getting to the nuts and bolts of what's required to implement this within your organization. Now, it may come as a surprise to you, but the first step for automation is that automation should not be the first step, right? So I want to spend a little bit of time on this because I think it's important. There are so many organizations out there at the moment that are accelerating their digital and automation agenda. And they've got teams of people that go out to individuals in the business and they look for automation opportunities. This is totally fine. As we've already seen, there's a huge amount of opportunity to use these capabilities and technologies, especially in procurement, right? It's very important that as part of that conversation, we consider multiple improvement levers. So that goes beyond just intelligent automation. It also means considering simplification, standardization, and enhancements or use of existing capability within your existing systems, right? So we have to look at an end-to-end process is about looking at step one and saying it's non-value add, I can eliminate it altogether. Maybe step two is inconsistent across regions or countries, and we can introduce some consistency. Maybe step three, there's actually capability that when we're paying for in our ERP system or our end-to-end source-to-pay platform, would be it SAP, Ariba, or Coupa, that we're not using today that we could be using, right? So we need to take this holistic view, and then what you end up with is a holistic set of opportunities that you can combine together and sequence in the right order as part of your transformation or improvement roadmap to ensure that you get the most amount of value out of your end-to-end process optimization activity. The other lever, of course, is transition or outsource. So, this would, in the past, would have been the go-to lever in terms of reducing cost. It's still an option for many organizations, but again, we're able to combine this with intelligent automation and RPA. A number of the tasks that we would have otherwise transitioned or outsourced may actually lend themselves to automation. So we can think about which levers we want to pull first, and then as I say, transformation roadmap is holistic in nature rather than just being focused on automation. In terms of the steps that we go through to implement intelligent automation, so obviously there's scoping and objectives. Let's get clear on the problem that we need to solve. Then we get into opportunity identification and validation. So this is where we come up with our list of use cases that are suited to our organization, and we can prioritize them based on benefit and ease of implementation. As part of the design phase, so we may, in a lot of cases, run a proof of concept to demonstrate the value to the organization. Vendor selection that we'll get onto in a second, but there's a number of vendors that we can work with in this space. Your center of excellence, operating model design, and then we get into iterative implementation. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to walk through each of these steps and give you a little bit of insight into the how behind how you can implement this within your business. So identifying opportunities. Identifying opportunities, again, let's go, come back to the levers. It's simply about asking the right questions, right? So how do I know whether I've got a simplification opportunity or an RPA opportunity? It's about looking at your end-to-end process and asking the right questions, right? So when you run a future state process design session, put this on the wall and walk through with users of the process and ask these questions. So simplification, how might we remove non-value add activity or reduce rework or waste? I'm not going to go through all of these. Technological enhancement. Are there enhancements or capabilities from our existing systems that can be leveraged, right? So this is why it's important, I believe, that your IT or your technology team has a seat in the table as part of the design work. I think gone is the part. In the past, we would conduct design workshops, we'd keep technology or IT out of the picture, and then we'd come prepared with a list of requirements. Some organizations still do that. I believe that having, especially if you're using a big ERP system or a large S2P platform, having someone with the subject matter expertise of what your systems can do is very important as part of the design conversations. Machine learning, are there outcomes that can be predicted using data? Work that we've just done with a large manufacturing business, it's predictive analytics, but we had about 32 ideas for predictive analytics within procurement, right? And they all came from people in the business. We provided them some initial education in terms of what predictive analytics is, use cases across other organizations. So you'll be amazed how many ideas that your buyers, your category managers will have on how things can be improved and how we can leverage these different technologies. Language, so NLP, how might insights be derived from language translation, semantic understanding, and text summarization? RPA, are there rules-based repetitive activities? So, in summary, lots of questions that we can ask. And when we're designing a future state process, it's important we ask all of these questions, right? So what you land on is a holistic set of opportunities. So once you've identified some initial use cases, we can then dig a little bit deeper. And again, there's some questions that we can ask to assess the suitability and the complexity of the process or the task that you want to automate. I'm not going to run through all of this, right? But some of the questions that you may consider. So suitability, obviously we want processes and tasks that are higher volume, that consume quite a lot of time. So we might ask things like how many transactions, what's the process time for the process or task that you want to automate. We may ask how many process changes per year. So especially if you're building a bot or you're using RPA, if the process is likely to change 4, 5, 6 times in a year, then it's probably not going to be a very good candidate for RPA. You want a process that's relatively stable. Is there a strategic platform replacement? So if my organization has a technology roadmap that says we're going to implement Workday or SAP RFP in the next year, then you're not going to get the ROI on a process that you automate now, right? You either build those requirements into the strategic platform replacement, or it's something that you pick up further down the line. And that's why it's very important, if you're kicking off your journey in this space, that you get visibility and access to what that technology roadmap looks like. If we move across to process complexity, obviously we've got questions around the application complexity for the processes that we want to automate. How many applications are used? Is the data structured or unstructured? So, going back to our examples earlier, this tells us whether it's simple RPA or whether we need to layer in additional capabilities. Is there existing documentation? Is a full redesign required before we automate? We're looking at a pricing update automation at the moment with a client, and we found that the input request from suppliers to automate pricing, all of the inputs are of various different formats, right? Which is fine, but again tells us that we need to standardize the input before we can move forward and use RPA downstream for the automation piece. Right, so now let's get on to vendor selection. I know this can be a bit of a confusing, actually. The landscape is constantly changing. I mean, to be honest, we're even struggling to keep up with the pace of change here. There are many vendors that you can use to support your intelligent automation journey. It's very much individual to every business, right? So depending on the set of use cases that you've got, how much you've got, how much you've got to spend in terms of budgets, there's various different criteria. There's different vendors that we can use, but these are some of the, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are some of the leading vendors within this space. RPA is a very, very interesting area. The sort of leading three vendors for the last, at least the last 5 years, most of you may know, Automation Anywhere, UiPath, and Blue Prism. I think Gartner just released the latest reports, and Microsoft are investing very heavily in their Power Platform. So our prediction over the next kind of 18 months is we'll see Microsoft become a much bigger player and take a bigger market share in this space. But let's wait and see. I think it's quite exciting to see the movement here. Process workflow, you've got Pega, IBM, Appian, and various other vendors that you can leverage. But how do you know which ones to go with, right? Because it can be quite confusing. I think for your organization, you need to just be clear on the vendor selection criteria. You may go with one vendor. A lot of the vendors I just put up on the previous slide, they do have multiple capabilities, right? So Appian, for instance, they do RPA, they do workflow, they various different capabilities. It's not just as narrow as it looks on the slides. But think about the criteria, right? So total cost of ownership is a key one. You'll be surprised once you layer in maintenance costs and license costs, and then the cost of a supplier to help you implement these opportunities. The total cost of ownership can be a lot higher than people initially think. Suitability for your use cases, right? So when you look at your initial set of opportunities after you've conducted an opportunity assessment, which vendors are most suited to those? You'll be looking at technical capabilities, ease of programming and control. This may be something that's important to you, that it's very intuitive, that you may want people within the organization to be able to build their own automation. And then vendor experience and support. So possibly you want to work with a vendor that's got lots of experience within your industry, and provide some level of support along the way. So once we've got our initial set of opportunities, right, we understand which vendors we're going to work with. then we can start to think about how we build internal capability for automation. And what a lot of organizations do is they build a center of excellence. Now, my view has always been it shouldn't be an intelligent automation center of excellence. It should actually be a process excellence center of excellence. Because if you build a intelligent automation center of excellence and people within that team or function are incentivized for automation opportunities, what ends up happening? All the opportunities that you identify are automation. And sometimes we lose sight of the fact that we should take a holistic approach to the identification and delivery of improvements. But nonetheless, a center of excellence is very important. You know, there's different ways in which we can approach this. We can go with a local based model. So if you're a large business and maybe just within the function you want to get started, you just want to start your journey, you can start something locally and then eventually move to something that's centralized across the entire business. I think in the long term, without a center of excellence, automation becomes piecemeal. So you get a few good use cases, but it's very hard to scale. I'm going to stop there on the center of excellence because it's probably an entire webinar in itself, but a very important consideration nonetheless. And in terms of deployment, right? So once we've gone through it, we've identified our opportunities, we understand which vendors we're going to work with, we've got a sense of how we're going to build internal capability. How do we actually deploy the automation? So this is this model here is probably more relevant for RPA, but it's very similar to your kind of typical software development lifecycle. We conduct design, so we produce some documentation and solution design that articulates the automation. We move into development and testing, so we develop the bots, we conduct unit testing, functional testing, make sure users are happy, so we'll conduct process walkthroughs with users and UAT, and then we move to deployment. One thing I will say here, right, and very important kind of critical success factor is the change management aspect of deploying automation, right? I've seen it so many times where sometimes organizations think if we build it, they will come, and it's not always the case, right? So the change management wrapper, ensuring a solid communication plan, training plan, so you can really embed the change is imperative when you're delivering automation. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to finish off with some key things to keep in mind. I'm going to run through a quick list based on our experience and some of the things some of the lessons that we've all learned working in this space, and then I'm going to ask Bilal just to provide his perspective in terms of what's important when you're starting your journey. So the first one, I think we've kind of touched on this. Don't treat automation as the silver bullet, right? The holistic approach, consider standardization, simplification, all of those other improvement levers that we know and love, are just as important when you're driving this stuff across your business. Leadership and stakeholder buy-in, goes without saying. You need to even particularly your users, right? Because they're the ones who are going to offer up a lot of the opportunities. They need to be on board. There needs to be a compelling story and messaging within your business in terms of why this is important. Consider the end-to-end. So we've discussed source to pay and procurement. If you're really looking to drive automation at scale across source to pay, there's many different players, right? It's not just procurement. You've got your accounts payable department, and actually, they should all have a seat at the table when we're driving automation. So thinking end to end is very, very important. Align your COE design and prioritization process with your operating model. I've got a recent example where there's been automation opportunities that have been identified within the EMEA region. EMEA is a small percentage of the overall revenue globally. So all those opportunities get trumped by North America, because North America has the highest volume. So a consideration there could be to reconsider the COE design and prioritization process, so that the EMEA region can drive automation from their side and not always going to get trumped by the Americas. Think beyond productivity and FTE savings, right? So when a lot of organizations start their journey, it's all about how much time can we save and cost savings. I think you've probably already noticed that there's far more that you can achieve through automation. And again, going back to being holistic, your benefits model should go beyond FTE savings, because in some cases I find that can sometimes drive the wrong behavior. And then be deliberate about redesigning the role of procurement in the future. 50% of the source to pay process is automatable. And as we've already discussed, that means the role of procurement and the role of a procurement professional looks very different in the future than what it does today. So start thinking about that now, and the implications across the different components of your operating model as part of your automation efforts. So I'm going to hand over to Bilal now, who will build on those kind of critical success factors and talk to us about key questions that CPOs can ask themselves before they start their journey.
Thank you, Aaron. Unfortunately, the mute facility is controlled by you, so I was trying to say that I'm on mute. I need to be unmuted. So I mean, thank you very much. I've gone through in one of the last organizations I worked for as a chief procurement officer. We wanted to carry out a transformation, and the key considerations are really for CPOs thinking about a total functional transformation enabled by technology. If you're just looking at automating one or two processes, you don't need that. But if you really think about, okay, how do I take procurement from one level of maturity to the next level of maturity? There are some basics before you embark on the journey. The first one is really, what is the vision of procurement in the organization? What is the essence of procurement? What do you want procurement to be known for? Then you need to decide about the operating model of the future. What are the boundaries? What does procurement do versus what does finance do versus what does IT do versus what does legal do? Where are the boundaries? Where does procurement start? Where does procurement stop? And where do the other functions sort of complete the end-to-end process? What is the structure? Is it centralized? Is it decentralized? Is it center-led? Because without knowing that, understanding how you structure the architecture of technology is not going to be ideal. And then, what is the core to your future procurement function and you need to keep within the function? And what is non-core, and therefore you either move to other functions or you outsource or you just sort of take procurement responsibility out. And one of the examples in this area for procurement is, in certain organizations, accounts payable is part of procurement. And the CPO needs to decide ultimately, is this core, or should accounts payable be more suited under finance, and therefore moving them to finance would really liberate procurement time to focus on the strategic in terms of managing supply markets and managing stakeholders. Very importantly is understanding where the current pain points are. And the best way to do it is actually to ask the people who are experiencing the pain, whether they are the procurement professionals or whether they are the stakeholders. Sometimes what leadership thinks the problems are is not reality, and actually asking the practitioners, where are the frustrations, what is the pain point? And sometimes you think, I've got the system to do that, but then the practitioners will say, well, yeah, but it's never worked, and we actually don't use it. And therefore, understanding the starting point is very important. And then aligning to the company's model, whether it is in terms of levels of centralization, very importantly, the systems landscape, because if for example, a company is an SAP house and procurement want to do something that is supplied by a competitor of SAP, it's going to be a big struggle in terms of integration, in terms of IT support, in terms of being part of an overall systems enterprise strategy, and also very importantly, understanding the organization of the business, and is there a heading towards the direction of a global business services where parts of procurement will become a shared service, or in some organizations they think about all of procurement becoming part of a shared business service. To me, before you embark on the journey is getting the sign off from the business, and this can only happen if you can demonstrate that transformation will resolve real pain points and release value. And once you've been able to do that, funding becomes easier to get hold of. Getting support in developing a solution from IT, from finance will become easier. There will be goodwill because you're bound to go through a learning curve and some failures on the way. But most importantly, and what many people in transformation miss out, a failure of a transformation program does not happen during implementation. It actually fails because of lack of adoption. And therefore, if you have not prepared the grounds, you will not get adoption, and you will have all of the transformation experts helping you in implementation. And then they say, thanks and goodbye, you're on your own. And then 2 years later, you think, gosh, I've invested all of this money, all of this effort, and nobody's using anything, and we're back to square one. So I think laying the grounds before you start the journey is absolutely critical.
Cool, thanks, Bilal. I think on that note, it's probably time to take some questions. We've got a couple of minutes left. So I don't know whether you want to field a couple of questions that we've got from the attendees, Bilal.
Yes. So I mean, one administrative question. One of the questions was asking, could we make the presentation available?
Yeah, absolutely. The presentation and the recording will be sent to all after the session, so everyone will receive a copy of that.
And some people ask more than one question, so I'll try to keep to one question per participant. A good question for you, Hudson&Hayes. What is your differentiator with other companies that do the same thing?
That's a very good question. So in this space, we've got, I think, a very powerful combination of procurement domain expertise and also operational excellence, right? So we've got a large community and set of consultants who are specialists in business improvement, seasoned professionals, and by combining that with procurement domain expertise, we can drive a huge amount of value for organizations. So, you know, we can come within this space, we come prepared with a hypothesis of where those opportunities are from day one.
Thank you. And then we've got a question from a participant who works in the oil and gas industry in Qatar. How does the system work with custom-made products? I'm working in oil and gas industry. Sometimes the requirements will be custom designed to suit the requirements of the project. So how can we implement this automated system? And what is the difference between a regular ERP system software as they also generate POs?
I mean, we would need to take that on a sort of case by case basis, I think. But in some cases, if you've got an ERP system that generates POs and processes POs, then there's no need to layering automation capabilities. And this is where I made the point about vendor selection and the identification of opportunities need to be very specific and nuanced to your business, right? So whilst there are some initial use cases that you may be able to identify within your industry, this is why we need to include the users, and it needs to be very specific to what your business needs. I hope I've answered that okay. If I haven't, then feel free.
No, I mean, I think you're right. What we are proposing is automating processes. The processes will differ by industry, and therefore Absolutely. The automation will be different by process as the processes differ. Okay, there's another interesting question from a participant in India. Who owns the intelligent automation capability and implementation? Will that be IT, procurement, or the Center of Excellence? If we have an idea, who are the best people to approach?
It's a very good question, and I'd sort of ask for the definition of own. So in some case, what I've seen in the past is if an organization is just starting their journey, they will use partners to support with the implementation. In terms of where it sits in the business, I've seen it sit in IT. I've also seen it kind of sit out in the business. I've also seen it kind of sit with an individual function. So every sort of business is different there. But a common thread is earlier on in the journey, delivered by partners, and then eventually passed over to the business where they build their own internal capability.
Thanks, I mean, I don't know. There are a few more questions, but I mean, considering we've taken 2 minutes additional from people's times, we've said the webinar will be an hour. Perhaps if you can put the one with the contact numbers, and then people can send you any queries, questions directly to you, and we'll try our best to answer any other questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of next steps on this, if you've got any other questions or you want to reach out, feel free to reach out to either myself or Susan, who's our relationships director. You can see the details on the slide here. You'll all receive a copy of the presentation and the recording from today's session. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and thank you for joining us. I know an hour is quite a lot to take out of your diaries, especially in the middle of the day. So I thank you all for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.